But we are thrilled to death to have you here today. We're also very excited to continue to partner with the Department of Education in providing opportunities for us to continue to learn more about what's happening in the department, what's happening in the state, because we know it is ever changing. We know it is moving at a lightning speed, and if you've been following what's happening at the State House, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, we have a lot of activity in this short session that are regarding education. Thrilled to death this week, and I'm probably taking all of Superintendent McCormick's introduction, but we're also thrilled to see that ESSA was approved by Secretary DeVos and has been lauded as one of the top 10 ESSA plans in the country. Certainly a testament to the staff at the DOE, to the leadership of Superintendent McCormick, and it is my pleasure at this time to turn the microphone over to our 44th State Superintendent and probably our last elected State Superintendent, Dr. Jennifer McCormick.
Well, good afternoon. I know you are crazy busy and you are not here to hear me necessarily, because we have a good lineup with Dr. Flores and Maggie and Amanda in the back, and so we have a lot of information to cover that hopefully will be helpful. But I want to come up and first of all just thank you. I know there are a lot of arrows and moving targets right now for all of you, and so I appreciate you hanging in there. I also appreciate many of you have been super helpful during this short session and reaching out, and when we call upon you, you have been there, so I appreciate that as well. We're going to jump right into things, and we're going to put this up. You know, we added this slide. And the reason why we did that versus what we presented at our last session was because there seems to be a lot of confusion. And any information you can provide to your staffs would be very helpful in your school boards. So we put this up to show the governance structure of Indiana, because what we have found is sometimes some of you are even still confused on how this is working. So basically you have a state board of education that is not aligned like your local boards of education. So we have a state board of education, and then we have the Department of Education. So in the state board of education, it has appointees. And so as you can see, we tried to map that out for you to give you a better understanding on how that looks. The governor has 8 appointees on the state board of education. We have 1, that would be me. So I'm a person who's the only elected person on it. And then we also have a speaker, and the pro tem has an appointment. So in the big scheme of things, keeping in mind what this looks like, it's really a governor's board. They have 8 appointees. So keeping that in mind, I think, is extremely important to say there's a state board of education that has a state board staff. So that's the kind of the governance structure. It does not equate to the Department of Education. The only commonality of that is I'm the chair of the state board. So, but that's it. It's not structured like the local level where you have a superintendent and they answer up to a board, your local school board. It's not in that structure. So any help you can give us, and we're going to put this part of the website or part of the PowerPoint that's going to go out, but any help you can give us on this, teachers are extremely confused from what we have found, that when they hear about the state board, they think the state board is the Department of Education. It is not. Although there are parts of it, that's me, being one person that's on that board is its own entity in itself. Indiana is kind of unique in this structure, and so I think it's important that the educators out in the field have a better understanding. So any help you can give us with that would be much appreciated. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Flores so she can jump right into assessment. And again, we appreciate you coming out and listening to our information today.
Good afternoon. So I have several updates to share with you today. I'm going to segment my presentation into 2 portions. The first is going to focus on updates related to the 17-18 test administration, and then I'll spend some time giving you updates related to iLearn as well. I see several familiar faces out here. We are in the midst of our pre-test workshops right now, and so for some of you that are joining those, some of the highlights I'm sharing today will be the same information. For the 17-18 upcoming administration, as you know, we are increasing our online participation. With iLearn, that is going to be a computer adaptive assessment. And so with that, we really wanted to allow corporations this year to make a thoughtful transition regarding their online participation. As part of our training out in the field, we are also reinforcing key areas to minimize undetermined results and test invalidations. Again, calculator accommodations have tended to be an issue that has compromised many assessments, and so I'll provide some updated guidance related to that in a few moments. We also worked with Pearson to address the student transfer process. Again, this was an area last year where we received a lot of feedback from the field with that not happening in a timely fashion. And we really went back to a lot of the feedback that we received from the field last year related to the examiner's manuals and when those can be provided to examiners to prepare. We want to make sure that examiners fully understand the processes and protocols around the standardized test administration, and so we do allow more flexibility with providing those for this upcoming administration. Related to monitoring and test security, again, this is done both from the department's perspective and also locally. We do complete several rounds of monitoring during the test windows. We do that for each test window separately. And again, we're trying to ensure that there's processes and protocols in place locally to ensure that those accommodations for students that need those are delivered with fidelity. And really this year what we're trying to avoid is for students who should not be receiving those accommodations that they are not receiving them. Again, with test examiners, we want to make sure that they are using those standard protocols and avoiding coaching, which again leads to some test irregularity and security issues. From our winter retest, there's a few points that I want to highlight here as you take some lessons learned back to your buildings and corporations. We just had our winter retest in December, and so these 3 points are areas where we had tests compromised related to these issues. Again, what we're really trying to avoid in terms of training are those areas where the human interaction has compromised tests. So again, using calculator on non-calculator sections, allowing students to use other students' test tickets and logging in as someone else, and providing the wrong amount of time to students. So again, we just want to reinforce how important it is to add specific training to processes that you already have in place to minimize these issues. We did make a change for spring related to the calculator guidance, and what I would like to reinforce with this change is this is really geared for students who are general education students and should not have calculators as part of their entire test administration. We really want to reinforce the use of the online calculator to the extent possible for students. When we have students that are given a calculator and should not have been given a calculator, that will lead to a student receiving an undetermined result. For the winter retest, we had 88 students where this occurred, and that was one of their graduation retest opportunities. So we really want to try to avoid this going forward. If you have specific concerns about your ability to do this for spring, please reach out to our office so that we can work with you on this guidance. I know this is a change, but again, we're trying to avoid undetermined to the extent possible. We also have a change this year in terms of the federal flexibility. For English language arts that will need to be administered to students with limited English proficiency, this chart just highlights how those scores will be integrated into accountability over time. So this first year it will be more limited, but then by 1920 across both English language arts and mathematics, they will be integrated into participation, performance, and growth. I want to take the opportunity to highlight a few resources that we've released in the last few months, really to try to make assessment more transparent to educators in the field. So previously, We had instructional and assessment guidance that was posted on our website to delineate some of the key priorities of test content. We've tried to take that a step farther this year, especially in light of the changes happening with iLearn, to provide a little bit more detail to educators that are offering remediation on these assessments. So the blueprints that I've noted here, they are posted publicly on our website. And if you look at the far left-hand column, I know it may be difficult on your slides to see this, but the reporting category on the far left is the information that we would have previously released in the blueprint. So we've taken that a few steps farther, and so now we also provide the standard, the point range for each standard on the assessment, the percent range for each standard on the assessment, and then that overall point allocation for each reporting category. These are provided for both English language arts and mathematics, and then we also have a supplement to them, which is the item specifications. The item specifications are created for item writers to create items for our assessment, and there's some key considerations that we think are valuable for educators as well, so we wanted to make them available. First, it notes the reporting category that's represented as well on the blueprint. Evidence statements are the key evidence that students need to provide to us in terms of assessment responses on the test. And so this is really the type of information that we're trying to solicit from each student when they're participating on the assessment. Depth of knowledge aligns to the depth of knowledge of the standard. So if educators are trying to represent that cognitive complexity that's within the Indiana academic standards, that's also represented on the assessment. The item types provide clarity related to what types of items may be presented for these students on this standard. The content limits will indicate if there's any specific portions of the standard that will or will not be assessed. And then sample item stems, again, provide an educator with some additional examples of how that may be represented on the assessment. Okay, so now I'm going to transition briefly to iLearn. So this is our new face of iLearn. We're very excited about kicking this effort off. We executed the contract a few weeks ago for all of this work to begin. So we have staff that are anxiously awaiting getting started with this work, and we're going to be kicking it off in early February with about 100 educators at our first meeting. So related to our assessment practices in Indiana, we had several lessons that we could integrate, lessons learned that we could integrate into our new system. And so I've highlighted a few of these here for you. First, we've had several challenges with our delivery platform over time. So one of the things that we wanted to ensure that we could do going forward was that we would have a reputable vendor in terms of summative assessments and had had great success with giving them online. American Institutes for Research was identified as the winner of the process through the Indiana Department of Administration, and here it notes they've successfully delivered over 70 million online adaptive tests over the last 10 years. For content development, this is again a change in Indiana. Previously, we had been creating all of our items ourselves. So my team would review and edit items that would be deployed to students annually on the assessment. We're now going to leverage some existing item banks to make sure that we have enough items to fully deliver a computer adaptive test well. It takes about 25,000 items to deliver a test that we will need beginning in 1819, and we're going to go through an item audit process with Indiana educators to make sure that the items that we're using are fully aligned to our standards. We're also very excited about accessibility. This is an area where there's been great innovation in the last 5 or 10 years within the assessment industry, and Indiana will have the opportunity to leverage some of that as well. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on as an improvement would be in reporting. So with reporting, after the first year we will have to set standards, which means that we'll have a group of educators come in and make recommendations about where students' proficiency truly lies in relationship to the standards. But after that first year, when students submit their assessment, we will have reporting within 12 days. So that's a great improvement over what we currently have, waiting until mid-June for preliminary and then late July to start to get those aggregate reports. We will start to have all aggregate reporting by July 1st. So again, with the new assessment, I've highlighted several of these features as we've been talking through this, but this will be computer adaptive, and we are focusing on grades 3 through 8 to start. There's going to be some more insight shared related to high school in the next few moments. But again, we're going to focus on 3 through 8 for implementation in 18-19. Computer adaptive will allow us to better understand students' mastery, and we are spending time with educators this spring to really look at the appropriate reporting categories going forward so that educators will have the opportunity to better understand instructional next steps. With additional supports and accommodations, again, we will have conversations occurring with educators this spring to really look at the accommodations, tools, and supports that we'll have the ability to offer within AIR's platform. So our plan is to provide formal guidance about those recommendations, hopefully by May of this year. With improved testing time, we have the blueprint committee that will be convening the second week of February. And with that process, one of the key considerations is really trying to determine how we can have a shorter assessment. So based on the models that we've been working through right now, we're estimating decreasing the current test length by about 2 hours beginning in 18-19. The other point to note is we are also considering having untimed sessions as opposed to the timed fixed form sessions, and that's again a policy issue that we will be working with throughout this spring. I did note the improved reporting structures. One thing that I did want to note is iRead 3 will also be integrated into AIR's platform. And for iRead 3 beginning next year, when students submit their assessment, their results will be instant. So for iLearn, there were several areas we wanted to reduce the burden for schools. These are just a few that I want to highlight for you. We're looking at eliminating or at least reducing significantly the number of TL data collections. So hopefully that is a relief for some of you. We're also looking at sessionless testing. Again, one of our issues has been with the test tickets and trying to manage all of those. Sessionless testing will allow the educators to proctor that assessment directly with their students, and so test tickets will no longer be required. We're also looking at a more streamlined technology setup with AIR, which allows for us to utilize a secure browser, so it won't function how Pearson is right now in terms of all of the caching of content that's required. Again, we will have a single test window. This will be defined towards the end of the school year. Right now, we estimate that to be around mid-April to mid-May. And then this next slide just reinforces all of the key steps that we have taking place over the next few months and into 18-19. What I want to reinforce for all of you is that educators are involved in each of these steps. So none of this work is being done in isolation, either in my office or at the department. So as I mentioned, the blueprints work that will kick off the second week of February. Specifications, again, where we're delineating how those items will represent Indiana's content, that will take place in late February. That audit process to confirm the alignment to Indiana standards, that will take place in March, and then we'll move into item development for any additional items that are needed. Data review, scoring, and standard setting will all occur in 1819. And with scoring, what I want to reinforce is we're really hoping to utilize Indiana educators in that process. And so that is a part of the AIR contract. We'll probably be providing an update about recruitment and interest surveys later this spring. I did note my contact information here. If you have questions, you can also follow me on Twitter. I did also provide Mary Williams' contact information, and she is managing our upcoming iLearn transition. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Maggie.
All right, thanks for having us today. I am going to give a brief overview of some of the changes that we're going to see with ESSA now that we know for sure it has been approved. Also, thank you to everyone out there who provided feedback or input on the ESSA plan. It was very helpful as we worked to develop a plan that would work for Indiana. So going into this upcoming accountability cycle for 17-18 school year, we have a couple of moving parts. One is no longer moving, thank goodness, and that is the ESSA plan approval. So we did receive that last Friday. The other moving part that we have is in regard to the State Board of Ed's rulemaking process. One note to make on this, the board approved the proposed rule draft at its January board meeting, which starts the rulemaking process, and the public comment information will be forthcoming from the state board on that, so keep an eye out. But please note that any of the changes that are proposed in the state board's rule would not go into effect until the 18-19 accountability at the earliest. So your accountability information that's going to come out this fall for 17-18 would not incorporate any of those changes that are reflected in the rule. So keep that in mind when you're looking at that. Later in the presentation, I'm going to get on just a couple of points to bring to your attention with the proposed rule. In regard to this fall and the accountability that you're going to receive, the accountability determinations you're going to receive, you will be getting two different accountability determinations for 17-18. One will be for state purposes, which will be an A through F letter grade that will be calculated based on the same metrics that we've been calculating on for the past 2 years. The other will be an accountability determination utilizing the federal metrics that are outlined in the ESSA plan. And that will be utilized for federal purposes, specifically comprehensive and targeted support or identification for school improvement and any federal funding purposes. So we're going to get into that a little more as I go through the components here. So first, this slide here just kind of highlights the differences between the two systems that you're going to see this fall with accountability. Under the state system, it'll be based on 4 different indicators: your proficiency or performance, growth, graduation rate, and college and career readiness for your high schools or schools with 12th grade. At the federal level, you're going to see an introduction of 2 new indicators. One will be an English language proficiency progress indicator, and then there will be an addressing chronic absenteeism indicator for your K through 8 or elementary middle schools. Another point of deviation between the two is in regard to the graduation rate that will be utilized. The state system will continue to use the state graduation rate, and the federal system will utilize the federal graduation rate, and I'm going to get into what that means a little more later. Also note some of the data practices will be different, and at the federal level, we will be reporting out on the subgroup performance on each indicator, which will be, we've done in the past, but it has to be a little more explicit in the reporting. So what those, how those differences manifest themselves, this slide provides the differences in the weights. So on the state side, again, you'll have 2 indicators for your elementary and middle school side. Performance and growth or achievement and growth, and they will be weighted equally at 50% each. For your federal determination for elementary and middle schools, the achievement and growth will continue to be weighted equally. However, they will go down to 42.5% to make room for the English language proficiency and attendance indicators. The English language proficiency indicator will be weighted at 10% of the overall grade, and the addressing chronic absenteeism will be at 5%. Because this is a brand new indicator, the intent was to keep it low as we kind of got familiar with that indicator. So while we're on the topic, let's look at the addressing chronic absenteeism indicator. Again, this is going to apply to our K through 8 grade levels. And this was to fulfill a requirement under ESSA to provide for a 5th indicator of school quality and student success in the accountability system. So we had an ESSA stakeholder group that involved individuals from many different backgrounds: superintendents, principals, teachers, Urban Superintendents Association, state board members, to discuss what this indicator should be. And ultimately, the decision landed on some sort of measure of chronic absenteeism, but the approach that they wanted to take was a positive approach rather than a negative approach. So what we came up with from that group was to look at the students at a school that are attending and demonstrating exemplary attendance. So 2 ways a student can demonstrate that exemplary attendance: one, by being a persistent attendee or attending at least 96% of that student's enrolled days, or demonstrating it through being an improving attendee. So this is acknowledging that those students are making progress toward attending more days of their school year. So students who demonstrate an increase in their days attended from the prior to current year of at least 3%. We will be utilizing a goal factor or a multiplier for this indicator. So if a school has 80% of their students meeting one of these 2 definitions, then that equates to 100 points. If not, it is multiplied by the goal factor, and it yields the overall score for the indicator. One other thing to note: this will only be considering the students who are enrolled for at least 162 days at the school. The other new indicator, and we will see this at all grades, so 1st through 12th grade, so this will apply to our high schools as well, is the English Language Proficiency Progress Indicator. And this is a required, newly required indicator under ESSA. Just a quick poll of the room: how many folks in here have 20 or more English learners in your school building? Okay, so this indicator applies to you. Folks who do not, you will likely not see this indicator in your accountability determinations. This focuses specifically on the English learner subgroup, and it's focusing on English language acquisition. So, and again, want to note here that this is a progress indicator, so it's looking at a growth measure for the students. So how many of these students are meeting growth targets toward English language acquisition? Note that this will be based on the WIDA Access Assessment, not the iSTEP or iLearn assessment, because it is measuring English language acquisition, not mastery of academic standards. There will be annual goal targets set for each student. We are still in the process of getting those set, and we will provide any information we can as soon as possible. Again, similarly, this will also have a goal factor of 70%, so if you have 70% of your English learners meeting or exceeding their goal factor for the year, or their goal target for the year, growth target for the year, or attaining English language proficiency, which is hitting a level 5 or higher, then those students will count in for your school toward this rate. So looking at the high school distribution of indicators, for the state system that you'll have this next fall, the weights will remain the same, where graduation rate and college and career readiness will each be 30% of the overall grade. And I see a typo there, actually. Growth and achievement will each be 20% of the overall grade. The only new indicator for high schools will be that English language proficiency indicator. So note that we pulled that 10% weight out from growth and achievement, so those will now be 15% at the federal level, and the English language proficiency will be 10%. A note on the weights, because I did see that a lot of hands didn't go up when I asked about the 20 English learners in your school. If you do not have enough students to calculate the English learner indicator, for elementary or middle schools, that weight will be redistributed, that 10% gets redistributed to your performance and growth. So 5% equal to each will go back to those two indicators. For high school, that 10% will be redistributed to all remaining indicators in a way that maintains the ratio of the weights for those remaining indicators. Okay, earlier I mentioned that there will be some differentiation between the graduation rates that are utilized for accountability purposes. So under the state's accountability system, we will be utilizing any student counts as a graduate who earns a general, core 40, or honors diploma. Right now, for the federal, we cannot count the general diploma. The department did submit a waiver request to be able to count the general diploma for our federal graduation rate to the U.S. Department of Education, but we are still awaiting a response from them on that. And once we do have a response, we will certainly be disseminating that to you all. But right now, I always kind of operate under worst case scenario, so the federal system will only count core 40 and honors students as graduates. The other difference between the two rates will be in regard to the mobility codes, specifically the codes of withdrawal due to long-term medical condition, placement by court order, or missing will only count as mobility codes on the state side. They will not count as mobility codes on the federal side. So this is just a little informative slide here for you all to just kind of remember what the graduation requirements are, as we are in a constant state of transition here in Indiana. So this cohort of students will be on the graduation qualifying exam, which is the ECA. We will have a GQE through the 2022 cohort. We are currently awaiting to find out what the GQE is for the 2022 cohort. The General Assembly is discussing that right now, so we will hopefully have a response by the end of session on what that will be for the 2022 cohort. And then your 2023 cohort is going to be the first one where we're going to see the graduation pathways implemented. So speaking of graduation pathways, many of you may be aware that the College and Career Readiness Indicator, as it is currently written, incorporates 4 of the graduation pathways as indicators of college and career readiness. So just a heads up, once we do transition to the pathways, we are going to have to reevaluate the college and career readiness indicator. It may go away entirely, or it may be revised, because we cannot duplicate the counts of these indicators as pathways. I'll get into what the current board rule is proposing as a replacement to this indicator in a couple of slides. Getting into the weeds a little bit, another difference you're going to see between the state and federal accountability for this fall is in regard to the number of students required to calculate indicators. There will be multiple minimum numbers required for the state side. On the federal side, all indicators will be based on a minimum number of 20 students. So that is a little bit different. So you may see some deviations between the indicators based solely on your number of students. The other thing, for those of you that are smaller schools, the federal system will not aggregate data backward if you don't hit that minimum number of students. Lastly, all indicator scores will be capped at 100 points on the federal system. That is a little bit of a deviation from the state system, because right now I believe growth and graduation rate can exceed 100 points with their bonus point structure. So when you receive the state accountability grade for 17-18, that is what will be utilized to determine school improvement at the state level. And this is based solely on the number of consecutive Fs that you receive. So the state determination will go toward this consecutive F timeline. The federal side will go toward identification for either comprehensive or targeted support. Comprehensive support is fairly similar to what has previously been deemed priority status. These are the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools when we rank all schools in the state. Any public high school with a federal graduation rate of 67% or less. And then there's a new identification criteria of any Title I school with what is deemed a chronically underperforming subgroup. These are any schools that have not exited a subgroup from targeted support. That begs the question, what is targeted support? Targeted support is if you have one or more subgroup with an overall accountability score that is at or below that bottom 5% threshold that we utilize to identify for comprehensive support. So let's walk through an example of how this will be determined. So let's say for comprehensive support, that bottom 5% threshold is 58.8 points out of 100. The example school has at least 20 students in 3 subgroups, the Hispanic, Asian, and special education subgroups. We then calculate a score for each subgroup that is based on all of the required or available federal indicators. When we do so, we find that the Hispanic subgroup has an overall score of 58.8 points, the Asian subgroup 70.1 points, special education 53.6 points. When we refer back to that 5% threshold for comprehensive and targeted support, we can identify that the Hispanic group will be identified for targeted support because it's at or below that bottom 5% threshold, and same with the special education group. So this school would be identified for targeted support for the Hispanic and special education subgroups. Note, it is possible that you could be identified for targeted support and still have an A, B, or C letter grade overall, because that overall letter grade considers all students in the school, not a specific subgroup. Okay, shifting gears just briefly here at the end. As I mentioned at the beginning, the State Board of Education has put out its proposed, or has voted to approve its proposed 8th REF rules. We did want to acknowledge that they have added 2 new indicators to that system that we do not have currently in our ESSA plan. One is referred to as the Well-Rounded Educational Development Indicator. That indicator would apply to your elementary and middle schools and calculates the proficiency, or considers the proficiency and participation on the science and social studies assessments. The other new indicator would apply for high school, and it is a high school 9th grade on-track indicator. This is what is being proposed to replace the college and career readiness indicator by the State Board of Education. This indicator considers the number of 9th grade students, or students in the 9th grade cohort, who are considered on track by the end of their 9th grade year. On track under the board rule is having or completing at least 10 credits and receiving no more than 1 F in a core subject area. The core subject area is math, science, social studies, and English. I did put down there the email for the State Board of Education, their general email for any kind of public comment. So if you would like to make any public comment on the rule, we recommend looking over the rule, and we will also have more information about public hearings as we receive it. Just to give you an idea of how this is going to look based on the rule that the State Board is proposing. For the K through 8 side, the weights of performance and growth would continue to be 42.5% each. And then the attendance, that science, social studies indicator, and the English language proficiency indicator would all be at 5%. And for high school, they have 2 different weights depending on the pathways introduction. So from the 18-19 school year until the 2023 school year, achievement would be at 25%. College career readiness and grad rate still at 30% each. The on-track, that 9th grade indicator, would be at 10%, and English language proficiency at 5%. One thing you'll notice is that there is no growth at the high school under the State Board's proposed rule. After pathways are introduced and proposed, the graduation rate would then be 50% of the high school grade, achievement or performance at 30%, that on-track would go up to 15%, and then the ELP at 5%. If there are any questions on this, this is our general accountability inbox. Now that we do have confirmation that the ESSA plan has been approved, we will be putting together some webinar opportunities for folks to receive information, a little bit more in-depth information on how the accountability will be determined. So stay tuned for that. And now I will, and hold on to your questions if you have them, and I will turn them over to Amanda McCammon to talk about CTE.
My name is Amanda McCammon, and I'm the Chief of Workforce and STEM Alliances for the Department of Education. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about career and technical education as it relates to the new graduation pathways. Currently, there are multiple bills that are proposed that are impacting career and technical education. Some things to keep in mind would be the proposed bills, including Senate Bill 50, where it's really looking at career and technical education and where it's housed, creating a new commission. There's also multiple bills around the apprenticeship programs for graduation pathways, requiring them to be federally registered DOL apprenticeship programs only. There's a bill regarding work permits which impacts the work that our schools are doing in terms of the age and whether or not work permits are actually required. There are also additional bills around employability skills, which I'll talk a little bit about later on in the slides, but are the DWD and industry-created standards around employability that are to be taught. And lastly, there's a bill regarding a single diploma, which clearly would impact what I call bucket one for grad pathways. The State Board of Education staff is really owning the graduation pathways definitions and guidance that will be provided. They have held task force meetings with various stakeholder groups to gain input into the guidance that they'll be developing. We believe that guidance will be out closer to July, however, from the State Board of Education. In the meantime, we are attempting to provide insight and resources around a specific area within Bucket 3 today. CTE is embedded in various locations in the new graduation pathways in CTE. I will highlight these areas today and review some opportunities that we have now to localize these plans and prepare with the information that we do have for what's to come. It's important to note the different areas within the new graduation pathway requirements within the chart that was provided by State Board of Ed. On the left-hand side, you have what I call the buckets under graduation requirements. You have bucket 1, which is high school diploma, bucket 2, which is learn and demonstrate employability skills, and bucket 3, which is post-secondary ready competencies. Students will be required to complete all 3 of the buckets. When you look on the right-hand side of the graduation pathway requirements, this is where you see the options. Students will complete 1 item within each of the options of the buckets. So, students will complete bucket 1, high school diploma. They will complete within bucket 2, learn and demonstrate employability skills, 1 of the 3 options, project-based learning, service-based learning, or work-based learning. Then students will also complete 1 option within bucket 3, post-secondary ready competencies, and those are listed there in the 3rd section, including honors diploma, ACT, SAT, ASVAB, state and industry recognized credentials or certificates, state, federal, or industry recognized apprenticeships, CTE concentrator, AP, IB, dual credit, Cambridge, or CLEP exams, or a locally created pathway. It's important to note that that last item within bucket 3, the locally created pathway, is referring to a locally created graduation pathway, not the same thing as what we will be talking about today, which is a locally created CTE pathway or program of study. These 3 areas are the things that we are going to be talking about today as it relates to graduation pathways and career and technical education. The first item would be the state and industry recognized credentials or certifications within bucket 3. There's a link provided here that show the state and industry recognized credentials and certifications that are currently approved by DWD and offered to our students. Additionally, I wanted to highlight the difference between industry recognized credentials and certifications, nationally recognized and state recognized. A certification is considered a credential, similar to how a degree is considered a credential. So those words oftentimes are used simultaneously. A nationally recognized certification is, for example, AWS with welding. It's recognized at a national level versus a state recognized, industry recognized certification, which an example would be culinary pre-pack. That's really a state only and non-nationally recognized certification. The second item here is the state, federal, or industry recognized apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are intensive work-based learning experiences coupled with on-the-job training and formal classroom instruction. There are differences, however, between state, federal, and industry recognized apprenticeship programs. Federal apprenticeship programs are really all that we have access to at this time. These are registered through the U.S. Department of Labor, and there is a link provided here that will allow you access to that list. The state apprenticeship program is not yet in place. Governor Holcomb called out in his next level agenda the development of a state apprenticeship office. However, we do not yet know what this will look like or where it will be housed. The goal of that team, however, will likely be to develop a process for state-approved apprenticeship programs, which will provide flexibility for our students and for our schools in the operation of apprenticeship programs. The third item here, which is where we will spend most of our time today, is the Career and Technical Education Concentrator. A concentrator in Indiana is a student who has earned at least 6 credits in a CTE pathway or program of study, which is a sequence of courses. Indiana College and Career Pathways, or sequences of courses, have been developed with input from business and industry, secondary and post-secondary education, and the public. There is a link provided at the bottom of the screen to show you currently approved CTE pathways or programs of study. It's important to note that these aligned sequences of secondary and post-secondary courses should be leading to an industry-recognized certification from the list on the previous screen, a post-secondary degree, or a registered apprenticeship program formerly discussed. It's important to note that per graduation pathway requirements, students must also maintain a minimum of a C average in the courses that are counting for concentrator status. In order for courses to account as concentrator status, the Department of Education must approve the request for a localized program of study or pathway for CTE. We must then input this localized concentrator status into the CTE reporting platform called INTERS. Without this step, even if there's a developed plan of study or pathway at the local level, those students would not count as concentrators unless they had been inputted into the INTERS system as an approved pathway or program of study for CTE. On the February 15th workshop, we will be reviewing in detail the steps to create a localized CTE pathway or plan of study. The first step in creating a localized pathway or plan of study for CTE is to review your local data. This is really about painting the picture of the needs of your community and school, looking at the sectors that you have available within your community, as well as what jobs are the most high wage, high demand within your community, where the openings are and where there are needs within your community, both business and industry sectors. The links on this page provide access to some important data that schools will be encouraged to review and consider as they work to develop their local pathways. The next step in building out a local CTE concentrator status through pathways and programs of study is to identify your employer skills. You should think about your employers in your local area by specific sector. For example, healthcare versus IT versus auto repair. You should have collaborative meetings with those employers and listen to the skills that they need for their specific jobs and job descriptions. You should also work to validate local data with employers, projecting out 5 to 10 years for their needs. You should consider things like automation versus non-automation within your particular local community. Look for gaps in alignment between local workforce demand and supply, as well as needs of the employers such as specific age requirements, certifications, or additional skills. If you're not sure where to start in identifying local partners and businesses, a good place to start would be the Hoosier data link located on this slide. This will provide you with some information about the types of businesses that are located in your community and give you a starting point. The next step in building a local CTE concentrator through a CTE pathway or program of study is to build collaborative partnerships. I'm not going to go in deep to this slide. However, these are various entities that need to be considered as you are looking at who your partners could be or should be within your community and who you should be collaborating with to develop this local partnership and local pathway. These individuals and entities are important to consider as you begin to map the assets in your community to identify not only needs, but also how those partners will get a return on investment by partnering with you and your programs. We will dive into this more on the February 15th workshop. A few other areas that should be considered would be alignment with the economic growth regions and Ivy Tech campuses and program offerings. A lot of research has been conducted by Ivy Tech in regard to their program offerings and occupational needs within the regions, and we will share some of this information on February 15th at the workshop as well. The next step in building a concentrator is to design resource and need-driven local career pathways. So how do you do this? The first thing that you should do is take a look at the currently approved CTE pathways or programs of study that equate to a student being counted as a concentrator or earning those 6 credits within an approved pathway. Then once you've taken a look at those, if those don't fit your needs or what you're able to offer at your local school, then you should consider creating a locally developed CTE pathway or program of study. The steps to do this are outlined below, and we just discussed the various steps including review of data, developing partnerships, aligning the career pathways and sequences of CTE courses, considering industry credentials and college credits that can be offered, and then the final step would be to complete the actual application, which will be through a digital format online. Once a local CTE pathway is approved and entered into the Inters platform, it will be available and accessible for all schools to use and report. This way we're allowed to share best practices across the state. The last step in creating a local CTE concentrator through a pathway or program of study would be to strategically market and recruit. You should consider all parties, business, community, education, teachers, parents, students, and all stakeholders in this process. A great resource when you're considering how to strategically market and recruit is Advanced CTE, which is a national organization. There's a link provided here with a lot of helpful information on specific language that you should consider using as you market to different stakeholders. Thank you again for taking the time to listen on these critical updates regarding CTE and graduation pathways. We look forward to seeing you on February 15th at the CTE Concentrator Workshop, focused on how to develop local concentrators through the development of local CTE pathways and programs of study. Between now and then, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.